rock and roll.
And sand and beach.
Yes, rocks, pebbles, and stones. Oh my. Hey, everybody, Michael McGinnis here. Yes, it's the ripple effect, and you can see the ripples behind me. They're coming in. That's
They're right
why.
there.
Why? Because I've got Tom over here next to me who's throwing a lot of stones, rocks, and pebbles in there.
Undulating in the
Yes,
wavelength here.
it's affecting me, and as life does, that's what happens. It's the ripples that we each make, positive or negative, that really end up having that impact on everyone else. In fact, it's that whole science of chaos that really gave me a chance to really understand that saying of the ripple effect. It starts off with that saying is that a butterfly flapping its wings in China affects the weather in the US. As, how could that be? And then as I learned about it, it's amazing, every little thing that we do. All right, well, anyways, that could be a whole subject in itself. Today's subject, is it entertaining? Is it gonna be a blockbuster? Is it gonna say, oh my God, it's talking about what? Death. Death? Death and dying. Up, click. Up, click. Oh, there's another one that signed off. Oh, no.
Hands off.
Well, but you know what? And I was just talking with Tom beforehand. I'll kick it off, and we each have a lot of just personal experience. I think that we can share with the hope. The real hope here is that we start creating a conversation around something that we're all going to experience. And I know as I grew up, it was a topic you didn't talk about. Something that you were forced to experience at times when somebody around you died, and then you just sort of got quickly back to your quote more normal, and then forgot about it. And every once in a while, that doom and gloom thought of death would come up, and as I really started to grow myself personally, beginning with my personal growth, dealing with the issues I had growing up in a traumatic background. And then what I call self-discovery, which is really, who am I? Who's that person I see in the mirror? And then beyond that, is that stage really with respect to enlightenment. And I see Jeff's coming on. Yay. There he is.
Hello.
There he is. All right. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, thanks. I was just on a roll, so I'll keep rolling, and then you just chime in as we go.
Do you live on the beach?
I live close to it, but not on the beach. So this just keeps it there in my life all day long. Relaxes me. Yes. So yeah, as I was just sharing too, is that this whole topic of death is just what I hope is to create some more greater conversation with it, because as I grew up, it was a subject we didn't really talk about. In fact, I'll start there just to give a couple of ideas. In fact, everything I'm talking about here, I do elaborate some more on my posts. I just had a recent series on the whole topic of death. You can find it at discoveringmichael.wordpress.com. And it was just really healing to be able to also to write about it. But for me, early experiences of it is that old enough now, grew up, death was just one of those subjects never brought up in the religion. I grew up Catholic, never really talked about. And yet, it happened around me. I remember my first encounter, which is I went to New York City, grew up on the East Coast, and was there to watch the Yankees game. Oh, what a treat that was too. And here we are in a line, walking down the sidewalk. I could see the stadium. There's a home of the Bronx Bombers, the Yankees. And that was such a big thing for me as a kid. And as we started walking up the sidewalk, it was clear up front that everybody was having to walk off the sidewalk. And as I got closer, and here I was probably around 10, maybe 10 years old at the time, and as soon as I got up to that point where everybody's deviating off of the sidewalk, there's this, looked like an older man that was down on the curb. His head was up on the curb and blood was flowing from it. And I stopped. I just stopped to look, and yet everybody behind me was pushing me. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And it was this first visual of death. It was real. It was right there in front of me. And everybody just wanted to sort of move on. And everybody we talked about it. I was there with my dad and others. And But so nobody else wanted to talk about. We just quickly changed the subject to the Yankee games and this and that. It was something we passed on. And, a couple of years later, it was just, driving up a highway with my family, and boom, we just all come to a stop. And there was just recently happened this car crash. And as I'm going by, it was this whole family inside, and no doubt dead, just with the mash and the gore and everything that was there. And just, I'll never forget the image because I saw the driver, a man, and his arm was dangling out the window, and I could actually see his watch and see what time it was. And just, it just caught me. And again, the whole ride home, nobody talked about it too. And at 16, my mom died. My mom died from cancer. And it was this really sort of like crazy experience, it was a 2-year process of her dying. And here we were in the hospital at the point of where she was dying. And again, here's, 16 for me at the time, in there just trying to grapple with the death of my mom, is tough to begin with. But the night before she died, she was in a coma and been in a coma for several days, just out of it. And sure enough, the nurse came and got us and said, come on in. I think you all want to be there. So we thought, oh, this is it. She's dying. And so get in there. And here's my mom sitting up in the bed, just like I am here with her glasses on, smiling and everything. And I just sort of like, it was that surreal kind of moment. I couldn't really grapple with it, figuring I was going to walk in and see her dead. And there she was, just saying her goodbyes. And then she used this expression, I'm going to be 100% better. So of course, as a kid, I'm sitting there thinking, miracle, she's going to be alive. And literally, she said her goodbyes, said she was tired, went back, and literally within the hour, she was dead. And walked back in, and there it was. And so of course, it was really traumatic, just thinking, wait a minute, she was just alive there. But these early experiences and the after effects of it, and even with the death of my mom, friends of mine have come to the hospital, to the mortuary, or whatever you call it, the burial, and nobody talked about it. It was all engaging in some other kind of conversation. And got back to school, nobody talked about it. So the clear lesson I got is wow, death is just something you do not talk about in there. And so I didn't for years. I just felt it was this taboo subject that came up and had to deal with it. And everybody had to deal with it, I guess, in their own way. Because I'll tell you, I had a lot of sleepless nights myself as a kid. I'll never forget just each of those occurrences. I'd be home and I have nightmares. I've been years I had that nightmare of the guy's arm, the father's arm hanging out that window. I just would come up and I'd wake up and things, but I have nobody to really talk to about that too. So it was a tough subject in there. And later on in life, sort of zooming ahead, for me, I had to, first of all, make sense of why life. Because for me, growing up in a very traumatic background, death again was just something you didn't do. And I had to just grapple with the fact that I went through a lot of trauma in my life, including the loss of my mom, the abuse, all this other stuff. And as I did that, I realized that, okay, I can now start to see a sense to life itself. I'm growing, I'm returning from it. I'm not just this victim anymore. I'm making changes. But the whole topic of death kind of came back again. And I just wanted to know and understand death. Well, my life brought me on a journey. Mostly it was volunteer efforts, of which I had the chance to volunteer. And the common denominator was in and around death. And so I was a volunteer as an EMT, emergency medical technician, at a volunteer ambulance in upstate New York, which daily would just be running across somebody in an accident, somebody at home, or something that day that began normal ended that day, or was on the way to a hospital with some type of a serious injury. The other thing is I was a volunteer at a children's oncology camp. And here was this god-awful situation of being able to work with these loving, innocent children who many would die. From that year, we'd hear over the course of the year, which children died, and then next year repeat the camp process again, and had a lot of neat experiences, too many to go over here. But really what purpose I served with these kids as a counselor was to be able to talk about death. And they did. They came up and I say, hey, you can come and talk to me about anything. I never said death in particular, but because it was on their minds, they wanted to come up and talk about it. And I'm glad I was able to be there, and obviously not having answers, but just somebody to be able to be there. But as I heard their stories, it was like, wow, intriguing. There's something going on here. And then probably, the most profound was in hospice care, which is where here you are right next to a person who's at the end of their life. And there as a volunteer, you're mostly there to compensate for the fact that, families are struggling with it. And yet these people really want to get us, once again, talk about death and dying. And that's what we were there for. And so I got a chance to really learn about death, their meaning of death, and what it really meant to them in their last moments. And so I had these experiences that now were starting to get me close up front and close to this concept of death, seeing it around me, getting more comfortable with the concept versus something to avoid. And sort of the final piece for me that really then brought me over the edge with respect to conversation about death and comfort was the opportunity to be able to meet with Tom Sawyer, who we featured several conversations with, a person who has had himself in his 30s a near-death experience, came back and shared it with such great depth. And I still listen to near-death experiencers today on YouTube. There's tons of them on there. But what made it different with Tom is the fact that he was a person that I knew. And I had a chance over the following years to get to know him, to befriend him, and then see and witness all of these incredible stories, like some of them we're sharing here, to really see the human being. And it made it all of a sudden, again, real, just like the ambulance experience, the hospice experience. It was real, but it was real now from a death survivor. Think about that, right? Somebody who survived death. It doesn't sound like that is a possibility. But that collective experience all began to start getting me more comfortable with the concept. And so I have belief, I share my beliefs about it, but that's what it is. It's a belief. I didn't have a near-death experience. It's been strongly influenced by the many near-death experiences and a few experiences I have had in there. And so the culmination of those experiences helped me to be able to now be more comfortable with the concept of death, to the point where I can honestly say is that I really believe, and it's as hardcore a believe as you can be with it still being a belief, because I didn't have first experience with it, that I know in effect that there's a transition, that there's something that happens, that it's not an end to life as I know it. And that all of a sudden had this profound effect of making life so much more meaningful, because now knowing that, hey, this is a transition, nothing I have to sit back and fear, whatever, but instead it's that reminder to go and live for today. And then just a quick thing, and then I turn it over to the band here I did just recently watch, and it's in the post, one of the recent ones was this 97-year-old talking about really a day in his life. He's old, he was dependent, and he talked about death. And shortly after the video was done by his son, he had died. And I realized, my God, I'm comfortable about death, but why was I so agitated? Why did I feel so sort of stressed by that? Anxious is a better word. And it came out that as I read through the comments, which, by the way, this is what's so amazing, 23,000 comments, on this. And it was just like, wow, this whole thing provoked this really needed conversation that people are having about death, thanks to this gentleman who had sort of shared a day in one of his last days of life. And And in that one comment, one of the person said is referred it to the Buddha, as the Buddha said, it's not death I'm afraid of, it's dying. And that's what I realized for me is that process of dying, of the losing your independence. I had to go through and change my dad's diaper when he was in his last legs of it. And that's a part that I think feels yucky. And that's how I've realized I have to spend some more time contemplating to prepare myself for that as best as you can. But that overall, I was so thankful that conversation was now taking place. And to me, again, that's really the purpose here, is through us here openly, candidly, our own experiences and thoughts, trying to promote some conversation so that you can take some time, reflect on this concept, maybe understand why it's been something you've never really thought about. It's scary for many. It's on this primal fear of the end of our life. But then since it's there, confront it with, again, the major benefit of, hey, it's not something so big, bad, and ugly to be scared about. And that was a lot of what I then realized, that going back to the death of my mom, that in the last day, she had one of the experiences that many of my hospice care, I don't like the word patients because they're really people, but the patients in this, had these kind of like freakish kind of thing examples where they would all of a sudden light up and say the goodbyes and then go. And it helped me to realize, wow, she experienced something there that helped her get comfortable to come out of a deep coma to be able to say goodbyes. That's pretty awesome. So that's my experience, conversation. Let's turn it over and let's just sort of see where it goes. So who's next, Tom?
But you mentioned that experience you just mentioned about coming awake or coming, like towards the end. Jeff, you were probably there when Joe Stanton
Mhm.
had the gathering. We had, I don't know if you know Joe, Joe Stanton, who went on quite a few of our trips. She was a priest. She was ordained actually in Tibet.
Name rings a bell, but I don't recall the face. Right?
Yeah, she was a good friend, that we had one of our spiritual journeyers. And she had lung cancer, and we had all gathered in the hospital where she was, doing her last breaths. Jeff worked quite a bit with her, actually, with massages and so forth to help her relax, to make that transition, because she knew that was what was happening, and we all knew it. But we had a last gathering, I guess the night before she actually passed away. But we were anticipating, we were all told, okay, this is this is it, this, if you want to see Joe, this is the time to get together. And quite a few people gathered there in her hospital. And Joe liked to drink wine, in the evenings, and was always full of fun and joy. And so somebody had brought a bottle of wine, and we said, well, we'll all have a party, as she's going out. But we were all underneath of that we were trying to be happy, and all, we'll share a glass of wine with Joe. And even though she can't partake in that, she's there, out of it. And so we were all waiting, in a sense, just kind of waiting for, and she would be labored in her breathing. And I think we were kind of waiting for the last breath to be there with her. It's one of those things, it's like, is this it? Is that the last breath? And then when not, she would struggle for another one. Well, about, I don't know, however long in that mix, she perked up and she came alive. I mean, she was like, just like what you described with your mother. She said, where's the wine? Let's have a party. And she was talking about people that were there, and they were sharing stories about who they knew and what they were doing. And it was like, wow, she's not ready to go yet. And we had a wonderful visit, and she had some wine, and we just partied in a sense there, and she passed away the next day with her daughter. And that was one of those instances where there's something that gets I don't know whether it's just the wanting to say goodbye, or that, it's, if it's a gift, from spirit that provides that. Um, I know my dad, when he passed away, and my brother and I took care of him. We had hospice at home, and he and mom both suffered from Parkinson's, and he had gotten to where he was aspirating and couldn't eat anymore. So that was a slow death by just, you know, not eating and not being able to drink anything. And so it was a gradual process that my brother and I um, took care of him while that was happening for weeks. Um, and one night, not too long before he passed away, I came in and he was struggling to say something. I mean, he really wasn't all that communicative at that point, but he was struggling to say something. I said, "What is it, Dad?" And he said, "Help, help." And I said, "Oh, what do you need help with?" "Me, Lord, to live each day in such a thought, help." I mean, he started singing. He was talking a hymn that he knew. "Help me, Lord, to live each day in such a self-forgetful way that when I breathe my last breath," I don't remember exactly how it all ends, but it was a help me to remember to serve others. Help me to remember to serve others. That this is the thing that would last, and that's the summation of the hymn. To live in such a way that my what will be left of my life is that I will have served others. So there he is dying, right? And is, thinking about how he can help somebody else. And my brother and I, having helped him during that process, it was a revelation, that he was thinking not so much about being helped as how he might be able to help somebody. And really how he helped us was that my brother and I, we had not really done that much bonding over the years. He's a little bit older and he traveled and went out of the house early, and we didn't really get that close. But we had a bonding during that time of taking care of him that still lasts, till now. And so that was a gift in a sense of us coming together to help him. And on his mind was, how can I help you? You know, um, so I think hospice is a wonderful thing because you're not in a. My mom died in the hospital, not that many months after my dad passed. They were born the same year, and they died within months of each other. Uh, she had Parkinson's, but she just gave up. She quit eating. He didn't eat, so she didn't eat. It was a matter of a choice for her. But they had done all that they needed to do together. But she died in the emergency room because she, you know, eventually, and I was with her. I happened to be there that day with her at the nursing home where she was. And I was able to actually be with her. My dad died like the next morning after my brother had stayed up all night. He said, "I'm going to go get some sleep." And he died after my brother went to bed. He didn't want anybody around. So, um, so it was a very different experience. But I think actually what you experience with being with people going through dying and being able to talk with them and sharing is one of the ways that is really helpful for people to go through that. And I think that's why hospice is such a good thing, because people do process that, and they're at home, they're in their own environment, they're not in a cold hospital someplace, and they're not on the street. I mean, a lot of people die on the street. That the thing that bothered you was everybody was, let's go, come on, let's go, the ball game is happening, what's important here. um, but this person's life didn't seem to matter to any of those people, um, and nobody was taking time to honor that. Oh my goodness, and what the family was going through and so forth. So that's one quick thing. Another thing I want to share is when I was at Myrtle Beach, in earlier talk that I did, I mentioned my time at Myrtle Beach and some of the experiences, and I don't remember if I shared the experience of the butterfly. Do you remember that story?
I don't think so.
Okay. Um, you mentioned butterflies at the very beginning. I did a lot of walking on the beach during that time and had a lot of experiences there. But after one particular storm, when you have a storm at the ocean, it changes the landscape of the ocean. Everything's different. So each day it's kind of a new thing to explore. And I was walking the beach. It was really windy, or it had been windy the day before. And I was contemplating, I had been thinking about death and dying at that time. I don't know exactly what had triggered that, but I was thinking about that. And I noticed as I was walking, I saw a butterfly lying in the sand. It had been the sand had crusted its wings and it was just laying there, dead butterfly. And I thought, well, let me look at that closely. I mean, you don't get a chance to look at a butterfly closely that often. And it made me think, well, it's because he's dead, I can actually get close. I can observe this butterfly more easily and appreciate it. So I was in the act of appreciating its death and its beauty, even though it was dead. And so that was a revelation for me. And I was brushing the sand off and kind of honoring it and looking at it, and it flew away. And it wasn't dead at all. It was just crusted with sand. But it was because I had honored its death and had paid attention to it and wanted to observe it and honor it, that gave it life, because it would have died. It would have been crusted in the sand and would not have been able to fly away. So that was remarkable to me, that there was this connection between appreciating the beauty of a life, even in its death, what you might say it's death. It wasn't death. And I think that's what the near death experience that Tom, when he's talked to us about his experiences, and the idea that death really isn't the end. It's just the beginning of another phase. It's a crossing. In some cultures, they cross the shores and they go to the other side of the wherever the ocean is. You leave this shore and you go to the other shore, and there's a new land there, a new life. And so I think even in some cultures they go off in a boat when you're about ready to die, and they just go off into there you go, you're on your journey, and on the other side there's somebody there greeting you. We're saying goodbye on this side. Oh, I miss you. No, and on the other side, there's somebody greeting them saying, hello, welcome, this is your new life. And um, I think that's why it's easier to accept death that way, because if you know and understand that it isn't an end, it is a transition. And it's the dying that we are afraid of, the process of dying, the pain or the fear of actually letting go, and so forth, what that must feel like. If you've ever had a close call like that, you know what that's like. So, and I know that I did talk about one also when my wife died at Christmas in December 21 years ago, 20 years ago. That was, you had asked me how did I deal with that, or what was that like? And one of the ways that there were little fragments of that experience that were preparing me, and I didn't know it, but there were things that led up to that. One of the things, which was a blessing, because I wasn't with her when she died, I didn't even know she had died for hours until afterwards. I was playing Santa Claus that day, and it was the end of my day. I had a phone call, and she was checking in with me because she was about to go have a reading with somebody that was, so she struggled in her life. She had depression and migraines, and so at various points in her life, she really didn't want to be here, and she wasn't sure she could even do Christmas that year. She just said, "I'm not sure if I can do it this year," you know. But she was working at it, and I had met with Tom in a gathering in Berea. Went down to visit with him, and we talked a lot about her struggle and see if there was ways he could help. You know, what would he suggest that might help her through the depression and so forth and so on. So we had a long talk about that. And so in the midst of all of that, uh, that gave me some information about how to help her. Uh, and so she gave me a call when I was leaving, having been Santa Claus that day. And actually, two calls. First call was just as I was finishing up. She called, and I often would do that and have, "Hey, Mrs. Claus, hey, say goodbye to the, or say hello to the kids," or something like that. And so all the kids said, "Goodbye, Mrs. Claus," you know, when we hung up the phone. "We love you," or something like that. And then I went off, and then we called as I was on the highway um, with my Bluetooth, and said, you know, "See you tonight," whatever. Hope everything goes well. And she was off to have a party, to have at a party at Kay Linda's house. You know Kay Linda, Jeff. And they had left. She was there and getting ready to leave to go to this reading, and had a friend that she was dropping off with and picking up Erica and so forth, my other daughter. And Kara was at an event. And so I just said, "Well, goodbye, and I hope everything goes okay." And so it was like, I don't know, 10 minutes, 5 minutes after that, she was in a car accident. She had left and had this and died in the car accident. So I got to say goodbye to her without knowing that that's what that was about, and that it was a pleasant conversation, as opposed to, "Well, when are you going to get home?" And well, this is a really annoying, and having some kind of argument like some people do when they're saying goodbye or at the end of a phone conversation. And I was really happy that our last conversation was a pleasant one. So I always tell people, don't hang up the phone with somebody when you're having an argument. Resolve that in some kind of way or another. Either I agree to talk about this, and I care about you, and let's talk about this, let's in depth or whatever, not leave it unfinished. So having unfinished business, I think, has got to be really hard for people I've known a few people who had an argument with somebody, and then they went off and they had an accident because they were so upset. And that's got to be hard to deal with to resolve that. They were, in a sense, feeling like they caused that. So that was helpful to me to once I was told. I was actually playing music, and like hours later, and nobody knew where to find me. And so I finally got a conversation. I was playing music, playing the drums in my Santa outfit. And somebody said, "You have a phone call." And I said, "Well, can you wait till the end of the song? I'm here playing." And they said, "Well, no, you need to come now." So I had to stop playing, right? And it was with a group, and the same group that I had my tuxedo for my ordination experience. So then a friend of mine told me, he said they'd been looking for me and figured out where I was and so forth, and that what had happened. And so I had to drive home to pick up Erica and Kara, who were waiting. Erica didn't know, the younger daughter. She was at a pizza place, Mama Lazardo's, and she heard ambulances going by and sirens and everything, and she's waiting for her mom to pick her up. Well, hours later, after mom wasn't showing up, nobody wanted to tell her. So it was up to me to come there and to tell her what happened. And then pick up the pieces, and go home. And Kara, the one who we're going to talk with in the future here soon, went on to the party. There was a high school party, a dance, and her way of handling it was to go to the dance and just go on like you've described. I'm not going to, this is not going to stop me. I'm going to the dance. I'm going to have whatever time I can have with my friends and go and do that. And Erica and I went home and sat on the couch and slept on the couch together, for the rest of the night. And two distinctly different ways of dealing with it. But I've learned that everybody deals with that differently. They deal with it in their own way. Not everybody has the same, you don't have to deal with it in one particular way or another. Not everybody processes that same way. So anyway, that's some of what I think. Just having the understanding that, and I went to actually after, because it was after I had left Kara or Erica there, I had to go to the morgue, the funeral home, because Isa was there and there was nobody there. And she was in the basement and it was a weekend and there wasn't going to be anybody there. This was December the 18th until like Monday or something. And she was going to be down there all by herself. So I went down into the basement and did something with, she used to do this relaxation thing with me where she would put her hand on my stomach and rock it back and forth like that and put her hand on your head like that. So there was kind of a balancing process. Jeff, I'm sure you probably know about.
I think I taught her that.
Yes, probably did. And so she had done that for me a number of times. And so that's what I did. I went down into the basement at the funeral home there, Mayberry Funeral Home, and put my hand on her head and rocked her stomach like that. And of course, I just feel like that she felt that her spirit was still there, and that was something that was helping her to release the energy in her body. Because I think it takes a while for that to happen sometimes, for people to actually release from the body. And so for me, that was meaningful just because I was able to be there with her in that. And it took, and I was having to callous myself to go through all of this because I needed to keep it together for Erica, and I needed to take care of loose ends, and I needed to do this, and I needed to take care of that. So it was days following that I went to get the ashes from she was cremated. And the trip home, her brother came from Germany and her mother, that I picked up the ashes and they were still warm. And so I held the box of the ashes like that on the drive back, and her brother was in the back. And I just knew that he needed to hold the ashes. And so I handed them back to him to hold on the way back home. And it had meant really a lot to him to be able to hold, just to have something to hold on to, because, he wasn't present and they had to just come from Germany and so forth. So there's something about the touching. I think people are afraid to touch bodies. I ever since then, whenever I've gone to a friend's funeral or something, or they're having a viewing, I go and touch them. People, I think people are afraid of the dead body, and to me, it's they're there. That's their body, and it's not different. It's cold, and hard maybe or whatever, but that's them. And there's an honor that I think that's very helpful and very important to touch, to be there with them. Anyway, I could go on and on. Jeff, what have you?
I think you touched on several things, of course, but I think it's important to understand that we do grieve and we do go through that process individually. And that we have to step back from our judgments about how somebody else goes through that process. Because I've known people that, immerse themselves in the grief, immerse themselves in that emotional storm, and others that just took care of business.
Mhm.
And I can remember one gentleman and I forget, one of his parents, I think, that died. He was a client, and he was just business. He was the only child. He took care of everything. He just was like, and I was like amazed, because I was like, it didn't feel like he was feeling anything. But part of what I took from that was realizing that I have to step back from that, because I would respond differently and have responded differently. When, both my parents were dying. And I made a choice. It was very conscious that I would be there. I would do whatever was necessary. I was going to immerse myself in that experience, which I did, and was quite happy I did so. But, I have several brothers, and, and they each responded differently. And there was, I had to honor that, because they were choosing a different path in order to address the fact that their parent had just died. And, and I come back to, because when my mother passed, and I was fairly young at that point, I was in my 40s, I think. And when she died, and she died of illness. We made a conscious choice to pull her off of life support, so that she would pass on, because she had made it clear in conversations that she'd had with her husband that she did not want to be kept alive. And that was our decision. And I gave her husband a lot of credit, because he included us in that decision. We could have, objected, but in due course of that conversation, it became apparent that that's not what she wanted, because she would have been bedbound and on a ventilator forever. And so, and we were there. They pulled the plug, metaphorically. They took her off of morphine, as she was on morphine, and they disconnected her from the breathing apparatus. And then, no, they gave her morphine. That's right. They disconnected her from the breathing apparatus, gave her morphine, because they didn't want her to be in pain, essentially. But morphine stabilizes your breathing process. And so something that was going to take some hours took a long time, because she actually stabilized. And they kept coming in going, well, she's still here. And, we held her hand, we ate pizza, and I'll come back to the pizza point in a second. But, at that point, we slept, we took turns. And then there was a nurse came, I think, and got us. And we came in, and we were holding her hands and her feet and all of that when she, finally passed over. And again, it was interesting to watch the reactions. Her husband, God bless him, I think he did an amazing job. He was out the door. And my brothers, pretty quickly out the door. And I'm just sitting there. And at some point, it became really clear. It was like, this whole thing came through me of, well, she's not here anymore. You can go now. And the sun was shining. It was a beautiful day. And at that point, death, is it a transition? And I yes, all the spiritual traditions tell you it is. And I'll come back to Jo Stanton. When she passed, she was like this shining example of how to do this as consciously as possible. I remember laying there with a cross in one hand and some symbol that meant a lot to her from some other tradition in the other hand. And, you know, she had cords around her. I mean, she was like as conscious about the process as you could be. It was really a wonderful testament to how you can make this a conscious, you know, transition if you're aware that's what's happening. But, you know, it was just like at a certain level, I started to see that, you know, this death was just this part of life. It doesn't mean that we don't grieve. It doesn't mean it's not painful, but that process, it's just, you know, and it was a similar experience with my father when he passed away. And what was I going to say about the pizza? Oh, and so when my mother, so she passed and the arrangements were made, and we were holding the wake and we were at the funeral home and all these people, because she knew a lot of people, and there was members of our family, of course. There was, because she had married a person who was not my father, who, you know, I was pretty close with at that point. And, you know, and so there was his family coming. I mean, she just knew lots of people. She was very active in the church, you know, So there was lots of people. And it was interesting. We get there, of course, we're there early because we're the family. And, you know, and it's sad. It's morose. I mean, you know, there's your mother laying in the corner. And I remember people going, "Oh, she looks so natural." And I remember going, "No, she looks like she's dead." I'm just like, I'm sorry, she is not there. I mean, there's some flesh there, you know, but it's just like, I'm sorry, she looks dead. But, you know, and you know, and it's, you know, you're in that space, but then all these people came. And I'm not sure what occurred to delay the process of going to the cemetery, but something happened. And I started looking around, and there are all these people that I had not seen in decades there. People that were little kids when last I saw them were adults, married, being incredibly professional human beings, living, you know, their lives of life. And it became this interesting environment where we all just started talking and just started sharing what was happening in our existences, you know, and people were laughing. It was like people were getting reacquainted. Some of those people I haven't seen since. And so it was a fascinating look at grief, you know, and I came away with it with this idea that humans can only exist in that intensity of grief for so long before life starts happening again. And while we slide back and forth, because then the funeral guy came in and he was like, "Okay, it's time to go." And it was like a switch was thrown. And everyone's on morose again. And we're all just, "Oh my God, is my mother dying?" You know, and off we go and have that service. But that intensity, I just came away that human beings we just can't live in that. There's a point at which we begin living. Now, I suppose there's variations in that. Trauma, you know, I mean, because her death was not sudden, like Issa's was. I mean, you know, here in one moment, gone the next. I mean, that's like another whole level of intensity, I think. Well, a different intensity. And yeah. And again, it's like, yeah, I don't know if you can tell, but it's emotional even now. And that was a long time ago. I mean, she's been dead a long time. And my father was more fairly recently. But I think the real, because I think when we see people that are dead, or we see people that are dying, I think there's a natural tendency for us to bring it to ourselves. Because we're like, there I go. And when I look at I remember looking at my father's body, because he took him a while to pass. He had strokes, and he and I were very similarly built. I'm taller than he was, which I always enjoyed, especially when I could look down on his balding head. And but our legs, our physical being was very similar. And I remember looking at his body, going, wow, that's my body. And then looking down at myself and just going, wow, that's my body right there. Again, it was just such a fascinating experience of just that recognition and it brings it home. And there's a tendency, I think, to then contemplate our own passing. What is that going to be? Is it going to be painful? Because we can, how do I want to say? A couple of things pop into my mind. I enjoyed listening to Tom Sawyer's experiences of his death, we listened to them often. And I think part of that was to try to get it in there. You listen to something often enough, you actually kind of start remembering. And Lord knows I've done enough practice and and reading and and so much of that is to come to some physical and emotional awareness that it is a transition. But I think it's one thing to intellectually say that, and it's another to experience it, and then yet another to try to live from that experience. And I don't think you can do that until you're looking at it in its face, until you're presented with at least someone really close passing or your own passing. And, sometimes I would think that Tom Sawyer was lucky because he got to come back, and Margaret Keane and all these people to come back and go, oh man, it's all right. It's going to be cool. Well, I mean, I can intellectualize that, but when push comes to shove, I'm like, my hands start sweating. I get choked up. I'm like, man, I like sunrises. I like sunsets. I like seeing the faces of people I love. I look out there and I see God's divine creation. So, I think it becomes, just an intense thing for us to contemplate. And it becomes real apparent when we're in the presence of someone who's dead and someone who's dying. Which brings me to one more thing. I read a book, which I thought was just really exceptional. On part of the book was on this topic. And it's one of the latter books by Michael Pollan. And the book was about the resurgence of the use of psychedelics in the treatment of various conditions. And there's lots it's a great book. It's just a really excellent, How to Change Your Mind. That was the name of the book. It's an excellent book. He's an excellent writer. But one of the things they did was give, fairly significant doses of various psychedelics to people who were dying. And for some of those people, it became an absolutely life-changing experience because, like Tom Sawyer, they had a visceral experience of what happens when you leave your body. And I thought that was incredibly profound. And some of the stories in the book about that are beautifully intense in a really excellent way. And is incredibly well worth the read. And I've had several friends read the book and they're like, man, I got to give me some of that. When it's time to go, if I know I'm going, I'm going to take some of that and see what happens. And I'm like, it may not be a bad idea. Depending upon what your own, certainty is of what is going to occur. So
Wow, guys, great sharing, your up close and personal connections with death and the stories that it had and impact, again, all kinds of things that pertain to the conversation of death and dying. And Jeff, you just finished up, and what I really liked, I could relate to, you were saying is all of that learning from the Tom Sawyers and the reading and everything else there was great in satisfying the intellectual side of it.
Mm.
But it's not until it was up close and personal that I started to even remember having the doubts again. Is it true? Is it what happens? Because it was still that uncertainty related to this thing called death. And I think I'm more prepared for it because I think the conversations for me lead to a point of which there is a greater kernel of a knowingness. And I don't know how to describe that. It's still a belief at some level. But, a comfort, I guess, that, okay, there is something. I've done the work. I've explored enough to know. But you're right. It's not like because of that, I want to go tomorrow. I don't want to go for a while. But yet, at some point, it's going to be me, like that 97-year-old in that video, or whatever age I'll be, confronting this point. And oh man, and I like that comment.
I saw my body laying on the hospital bed.
Yeah, that was profound. I mean, you see yourself in the casket, right? You see yourself, and it's profound. But the benefit, so people will say, well, why bring that up? It's such a morbid perspective or whatever to do. And I can understand that. But yeah, I was on the other end of it where no, it was so morbid, it was fearful, something scary, and God forbid it came up, which it did at times, and I'd really be panic attacks about this thing of contemplating death. But I'd say at a point now, which is where I enjoy the conversation about it. And it was like when you talked about Joe Stanton, and it was while I was talking, I'm remembering the name and all I remember is I do know the name really well, and I want to see the picture of him. But I remember what a wonderful person, and the chance to be able to be there.
I wish I had a picture.
Yeah, but the chance to be there, what a wonderful thing where people don't want to contemplate that. I've heard of people having, I don't know if there's a term for it, but where they have basically the bereavement or saying goodbyes while they're still lucid, and it's in a home, it's where there are, hey, here's a chance, let's talk and let's say our goodbyes. So it's not there. And I thought that's a cool idea. You have to obviously have, a longer term illness and know that that's emerging there. But, I know it's there, but yeah, it's going to be that whatever feeling it is, because I'm not there, right? I'm not in that seat right now, and I'll get through it because everybody else does. You don't have any other choice. But to have others around that you can talk to, and I know that was the real value I provided in hospice care, was like your experience with Joe Stanton, is they could talk about that. And I was in a place of which I could talk to them about it, not with answers, but that they were just comfortable to talk about, because very few people have that comfort. Yeah, but anyways, I really loved the stories, and I just liked the conversation, because that's the part that I really suggest to people is the value of what, yes, sounds like a morbid kind of conversation, is actually a chance to really talk about a normal aspect of life. And you know what? As I have these contemplations, I have discussions, even just like now, I'll finish up and I'm going to be making dinner for me and the kids. That'll be a really delightful experience, because I'll value that so much more, right? Because it's that contemplation, recalling, remembering it helps me to remind me is that, well, whatever it is, I feel like I've got a clue of what it is that could help me proceed with it probably better than if I had no clue. But it now, every time I do, it reminds me is just to go and enjoy that walk with the dogs and hear the birds chirping and remind me of what it is there. And I wrote about the hospice care and the result of it. And no, never once in the, had to be hundreds of people. It was with never once did anybody ever talk about work. Never once did anybody talk about money. And it was instead, it was the loved ones and it was the regrets. And that's what consumes so much of the time. And the regrets, how often they would just turn to me and share, please learn from me. Don't wait till later in life to just enjoy life, or don't forget to spend time with your kids or your loved ones and to connect. Don't forget to go out and smell the roses, spend time in nature. And thank God I had that, because that were all things that I did increasingly do with my life. Because that was their regrets. And here they are not having any runway forward, only a rear view mirror to hold up and sort of look in the past, is to share these regrets. And that to me was one of the most profound things of those volunteering experiences, because it taught me that the measures that these people use when they're evaluating their life are not the same measures we're using when we're living life. And isn't that part of the challenge? That we're not thinking about that money isn't something that we bring with us, it's a means to an end, that the jobs that we stress out or identity gets tied to as so important, everything really means nothing, to us when we're at that point. That was the real learning experience to me. That's what really came to me as the benefit from all of these conversations I engaged in, particularly with people who are dying.
Yeah, I think as this, if this touches somebody, who is watching this other than us, um, at some point, the idea of how do you help your children or your friends to talk about this earlier? You know, I mean, I think that's for you in your early experience. Nobody talked about it. You didn't have a chance to process anything. You didn't even really have an understanding of what death is. It was just horrible looking. It was a mutilated body, or it was the dead person's, looking at a dead person rather than understanding the spirit, And I think having that spiritual understanding of what death is, that we need to talk about that more as with children, you know, so that they are not so afraid of it. I mean, they're not looking, children just go out into the life and that they could die in any moment because they're like, there's nothing stopping them, right? You have to hold them back. They're fatalists, but at some point or another, I think it would be useful to have those conversations with children and with along the way, what is death for you? And in a way that, so they're not freaked out by it, because I know that's an issue that grandma and grandpa are going to die, in so many years. And kind of like that, they get really attached. So maybe there's some follow-up in forum for that'll get stimulated to have people begin to look at death in the larger sense, as we've talked about.
And I think it's important to realize and to accept the fact that there's a fear element there,
mm-hmm.
And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with being afraid of something that, as we look around us, is that unknown, because it is unknown. Unless we have experiences that allow us to center ourselves into another level of awareness. And, certainly I'd like to think, to agree with you, Michael, that I'm more prepared. I'd like to think that. I certainly have had, incredibly blissful inner experiences that certainly, at least from my perception, transcend my body. Okay, I'd like to think that, but will I know? If there's time for me to contemplate those moments, you're right. There's an exercise of faith there. And it's also why I think I agree, Tom. And it is a topic that we certainly need to discuss more. I also think it's something that, and to come back to one of my favorite things to discuss, is practice. Because when we put ourselves in positions to have inner experience, when we put ourselves in positions to feel that incredible love that flows through everything, that can help water that seed of knowing that's inside of us. So that level of transition, when it occurs, won't be this intense trauma that we spend fearing. The more we have those kinds of inner experiences, the more we turn off that dialogue that just runs through our heads about all the stuff that people, and Tom Sawyer talked about all that. He's like, look, man, there was no questions about how much money I made. There was no questions about anything. To put ourselves into positions where we feel that internally can be incredibly profound. And that comes with practice, however one chooses to do that.
That would be interesting to understand different cultures. I would consider us here, at least our culture here, is a more death adverse culture. As I've referred to, we don't talk about it, and it sounds like there are cultures, based on what I've heard, that are more death friendly. I don't know if that's the opposite of it, but where there's conversation or where there's some understanding or discussion on it, it would be really interesting. I think that Native American Indians, from what I understand, and I recall some of the sessions, they have some of these sessions often with the pipe, whatever was in it, and I think that's where there sounds like some positive use. So it'd be interesting. Do you guys know of any like exercise where people can do things outside of the meditation and stuff? It sounded like you were referring to, Jeff.
Well, it's one reason, in a lot of the studies I've done, especially with yoga, because that's where I've focused most of that, is, and one of my favorite things was this guy went through this whole list of all these various practices, blah, 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 blah. And he was like, look, so if you're going to teach this, and he's like, for most of us, pick one and do it and follow it. But he said, if you want to teach this stuff, you need to do them all, because you need to have experience in them so that you can then be the person who can go, I think this would be a really good practice for you. The idea there is that there's a plethora of practices. I mean, some of it, of course, involves meditation, but there's all kinds of ways to get the clatter that goes through our brains, and again, most of that clatter is not helpful to these discussions, to get most of that clatter to come to a stop. There's lots of ways. And every culture I've ever looked at has developed their own. Native Americans, there were Native American tribes that would go out on their vision quests, and they were so intense that the idea was that they would have a death experience, that they would see their death, they would see their demise, so that when they were confronted with it in real life, they were not as afraid. And I've read some Tibetan stuff, some of those monks, some of the stuff they would do would be like, oh my God, You know, the whole practice of some of the various segments in India, they wear skulls. You know, they wear crushed up, they go to the funeral pyres and cover themselves in ashes from the funeral pyres. I'm like, do we need to go that far? I'd like to think not. But, you know, so there's lots of ways to go through that process. I think, true to what my friend, that particular teacher, was writing about, was to become acquainted with them so that we can then choose the ones that are valuable to us. And that could be sitting in a lotus posture and contemplating. It could be the chanting. It could be the walking. It could be whatever. There's just so many ways of bringing ourselves into those kinds of alignments to have those kinds of inner experiences. And for some people, maybe it is psychedelics. You know, for some people, maybe it is smoking whatever it was they used to put in those pipes. Maybe not. Who knows?
That's
Again,
right.
who am I to judge?
Right. Right. Well, we're at the end of our time here, and I, again, really appreciate and honor the fact that because we're here and comfortable and having this chance to really share, and in the hope that, you know, as I think Tom said, is somebody out there who does view it. It's I'm not alone. I'm not, you know, and there's others who have been there, and maybe something to glean from too. So I look forward to the conversations. And so, you know,
Absolutely.
next one, I know, Tom, we have yourself and your daughter
Let's talk about birth.
Wow.
Talk about birth next time.
Covering the spectrum.
Yes. Side. It's the other side.
Yes. Yes. That's good.
And
then,
rebirth.
And when we're ready to talk about death again, I'll send you guys each out a peyote seed there. And we could share the experience with others.
It could be interesting.
No, you know what? And I think, as much as I was joking, I was thinking, you know, we'd probably be the first and only recording to ever be out. I like that there'd be a new movement.
Right. Yeah, those numbers will climb now, buddy.
Yes. Oh man, I ripped, man, on the ripple effect. Yes. Gotta check out the scene. But oh yeah. But
it's a good book. It's well worth the read.
Well done. Well, guys, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. To be continued. Tom, we'll talk to you guys soon. Jeff, thanks for being here.
I look forward to it.
Yeah.
You
Take care.
Later, Gators.
Much love.
You bet. Bye-bye.